So I recently hit 10,000 subscribers here on YouTube, which I am really, really grateful for. So thank you so much to every single person who has subscribed to my channel, who has liked my videos, comments on my videos, watches my videos. I really do appreciate every single one of you. And because of that, I did want to do a Q&A so you guys get to know me a little bit better. So I went to Instagram and I asked in my stories for everybody to give in some questions for me to answer. And that is basically what we're going to be doing today. So with that said, first up, someone asked, how old am I? I am 25 years old. I will be 26 in April. Next up, someone asked if I have a job or what do I do for a living. And yes, I do have a job. I am a graphic designer. I actually own my own company. I work for myself. I work from home. So therefore I work on my own schedule whenever I want. And it's a pretty great setup. And I'm very happy with what I do. So that is that. But anyway, next up, someone asked, how did you meet your husband? So I actually met my husband through a mutual friend. So I grew up in a very small town, very closed off community where everybody kind of like knew each other. And basically, I think he was either like 14 or 15 years old when he had moved there and made a ton of friends that I actually was friends with as well. But he was kind of in one friend group and I was kind of in another friend group, but our friend groups were generally friendly, if that makes sense. Like we'd always go to the same parties or hang out in the same places or things along those lines. And that is more or less how I ended up meeting him. I believe I met him for the first time when I was either 15 or 16 years old. And then we slowly became friends. And when he was 16 and I was 17, he eventually asked me out and we've been together ever since. So yeah, that is how I met my husband. But anyway, after that, someone asked, what does your husband do for a living? So he actually owns his own construction company and he's also like very heavily involved in real estate and things along those lines. So that is more or less what he does. Next up, someone asked, how does your husband react to your collection of books? So he is actually extremely supportive of it. First of all, he loves the look of my books. Like he loves sitting in that library. Like 90% of the time, he will be up there sitting on the beanbag and I'll be down here like sitting on the couch because he just loves the vibe of it up there. But he personally is not actually into books. Like he never reads books, even though he doesn't mind when I talk to him about my books. So in general, he is pretty supportive and he really does like that. It keeps me busy and keeps me from not bothering him. So he could play Xbox for hours and I could sit here reading a book and we are very happy with this setup. So in general, he does really like my book collection and he is a fan of me having it as a hobby in general. So hopefully that answered your question. But anyway, after that, someone asked if I am Jewish, and yes, I am Jewish. I grew up in the New York Jewish community. And if you're not familiar with the Hebrew language, then in Hebrew, spring means Aviv, and I was born in the spring, so therefore my name is Aviva. That's just like what my parents chose to name me. They actually originally wanted to name me Ahuva, but my grandmother didn't really like somebody who was named Ahuva, so she's like, you cannot name your grandchild, like you cannot name my grandchild Ahuva, so therefore I was named Aviva. I think my uncle had chosen the name or something like that, but either way, they named me after the season that I was born in, so Aviv, Aviva. If you know the Hebrew language, then you do know that, it's pretty easy to tell that I am Jewish just based off of my name because I do have a Hebrew name. So anyway, that was more information than most people probably wanted to know, but that is what you got. So anyway, after that, someone asked, what made you get into reading? So I've actually always been into reading ever since I was little. It happens to be my entire family is very into reading. And when I was little, every single Friday afternoon, my mom would take all of my siblings and we'd all go to the library and max out our cards so that we had things to do every weekend, like every single weekend. That is all my family would do. They would just like read book after book after book. So I was always very into reading. I used to read things like Nancy Drews and the Hardy Boys and like Amelia Bedelia's, like things along those lines. I think I really liked mysteries as a kid, but either way, when I hit middle school / high school, I kind of like fell out of reading and instead picked up watching TV. And for a couple of years, I just binged TV show after TV show. Like I would literally watch hours and hours a day of a TV. And basically, I think it was at the beginning of COVID, very coincidentally. It wasn't because like, oh, COVID, all of a sudden I was home. Like I said before, I've always worked from home. I'm a graphic designer and this was always my lifestyle of being at home and doing things for hours and hours at a time. Like I used to like work all the time and watch hours of TV just in the background. And basically at the beginning of COVID, just very coincidentally, I want to say that again, because I know a lot of people did pick up a reading in COVID and it was just like a weird timing for me. But it basically, I think was the beginning of April when COVID had started in March or so. And I was at my family for the weekend and I was really bored. I had nothing to do. My entire family was just like reading different books. And basically my little sister, she basically handed me The Summer I Turned Pretty. She had a like bind up of all 3 books in one. And she's like, just give them a shot. I really do think that you're gonna like them. So I'm like, you know what, I've got nothing better to do, so sure, I will just read them. And I ended up reading all 3 books over the course of the 3 days that I was there. And that is kind of what sparked my love of getting back into reading as an adult, because happened to be, I was very sick of rewatching all of the same TV shows. Like I would rewatch Game of Thrones, I'd rewatch Gilmore Girls, or I'd rewatch like The Vampire Diaries or the originals. Like there were only a couple of TV shows that at that time I still really liked rewatching. So I would just always have them on replay in the back of my head. And I was honestly like very, very sick of them because I knew them all by heart. So I really needed to pick up something new. And when I was introduced to reading again, I'm like, you know what? Why did I ever give this up? Let's get back into it. And that is kind of what sparked my new love for reading as an adult. So that is more or less how that happened. And then happens to be, someone also asked if I have any hobbies besides for reading, like any other hobbies besides for reading. And basically, I kind of do, I kind of don't. So the thing is like I said before, I get very heavily invested in things. So when I was little and I kind of moved from books into TV, I kind of had to leave books behind because I just like, obsessed with TV, and I kind of only have like a one-track mind. And when I like something, I got to do it all of the time. So happens to be when I kind of got sick of watching TV and I went back to books, I kind of left TV behind, even though TV is not a hobby, but basically I kind of get obsessed with things. And when I like one thing, I kind of have to do it all of the time. So because I am now into reading, I kind of don't really do anything else other than reading. Like if I have any free time, I usually just have a book in my hands. But happens to be, I will say that when I was 20 years old, I did live in Colorado for 2 years because at the time, my boyfriend, who is now my husband, his job had offered him to move there. And we had always wanted to live there for a time just because we're very into snowboarding and we wanted to go West Coast because East Coast snowboarding absolutely sucks. So basically when we got the opportunity, we were basically like, hell yes, we're gonna go. So we ended up going to Colorado for 2 years. And when we were there, I basically picked up on the idea of working out. So I, over the course of 2 years, ended up getting extremely obsessed with working out. I would do yoga once a day, and then I would do a bar or a Pilates or like a different sort of workout class a day. So I was literally in the studio like twice a day by the time we were like leaving Colorado. It did take me a little bit of time to like, work up to that. But basically over the course of the 2 years I lived in Colorado, I ended up getting extremely obsessed with working out. And happens to be, if we still lived there, I probably would have this channel be a workout channel instead of a book channel because that's how obsessed with it I was. I even at one point became a bar teacher. That's how much I loved it. But basically when I find a hobby, I end up getting extremely obsessed with it and I don't have time. I don't end up having like the mental space to do multiple things. So has to be when we moved back home and then I eventually started to pick up on reading, I kind of left working out like to the side, and I honestly do not work out as much as I would like to. And that's actually something that I kind of want to change this coming year. Like in my head, I really would like to back up on the idea of being overly obsessed with reading and start bringing other things back into my life. Like I really would love to work out once a day again, except for some reason, I'm just like, I don't find the time for it because I always just want to read a book. So it is something that I have to work on balancing a little better, but I do have it in my head. And the first thing is finding the problem. And then hopefully I will, act out the solution. So I'm at step 1. Hopefully I will get to step 2 soon, but more or less that is my extreme over explanation of if I have any other hobbies besides for books. I hope you understood my answer there. So anyway, that is that. But next up, someone asked, how do you manage to read so many books? Do you have any tips to be able to read more? How do you balance doing work and other things in your life with finding the time to read? So I got a ton of questions specifically like this of how do I read so many books and how do I find so much time to read and things along those lines. And first of all, I think that a very important thing to realize is that I do not live like a normal average person's life. I first of all work for myself. So therefore I make my own hours and I work when I want versus working a regular 9 to 5 out of my house where I have to travel to work and things like that. So that alone gives me a lot of extra time to read. And I know that not a lot of people can do that. And I'm very grateful. And I do understand that that is a privilege for me. And I do appreciate it every single day. So that alone, it gives me a lot of time to read. But then on top of that, I do live a very, very simple lifestyle. And I don't think that a lot of people realize how much time other things take them. Like, do you go out to go book shopping? Do you go to like, I don't know, hang out with your friends or go out to dinner or go and do other things outside of your house? That alone takes up a lot of time. Just going to like Target to go shopping versus like ordering it online while you're just like sitting on your couch. Like there's a lot of things that people do to leave their house, and therefore that does take up a lot of time. And happens to be, I leave my house like once a week. Like I literally only leave my house to go grocery shopping and maybe do a couple of random errands, like, drop things off to the dry cleaners or something like that. Like I have a very, very simple life, and I don't think that that really wraps around a lot of people's heads. Like, I don't think you realize that like my general day-to-day life is literally like working a little bit while an audiobook is on the back of my head. Maybe I'm doing laundry while an audiobook is going, or cleaning the house while an audiobook is going, or hanging out with my husband for a little bit, or cooking dinner while an audiobook is going, or taking my dog for a walk while an audiobook is going. And when I'm not doing one of those very few things, I'm usually literally sitting on the couch and reading a book. Like, I do not spend a lot of time doing other things other than like necessities and reading books. And that's kind of what I said about my hobbies of like, I don't do a lot of other things. So if I have any free time, I generally just spend my time reading. And happens to be a lot of people are like, oh, well, do you ever watch TV? No, I don't really watch TV. Like, yeah, I'll watch TV to go to sleep in bed, but that's at like the end of the night. Like, we'll put on a sleep timer and we'll always watch a couple of episodes here and there, but that I don't really count as like, free time, because that's like going to sleep time. And yeah, I will very, very, very randomly watch a random movie with my husband, but he's not very into TV either. So therefore, because I've fallen out of TV way back when, I don't really spend my time reading, like watching TV anymore. Instead, I spend all of that time reading. And then on top of that, like a lot of people waste time on their phones. Like, yes, I am a big TikToker and I do like to waste time just like scrolling through social media mindlessly, but I do try to not do that too often. Like, I know that people could spend like hours and hours on their phone just doing like mindless things, and I really try to like limit that time, and therefore like maybe spend like 20 minutes at a time and then put my phone away and then try to read instead of wasting my time on my phone or things like that. That is kind of how I find the extra time to read. And I don't think that I'm a fast reader whatsoever. I do think, if anything, I'm a slower reader than the average person, even though I do think I'm pretty average. But basically, it's not that I read fast or anything like that. It's that I have a very, very simple life, and therefore most of my time is generally spent reading one way or another. And I think that if you wanted to find more time to read, I think that you should look at your everyday life and be like, well, what am I spending my time doing? Where can I necessarily cut out things that aren't as important? And hopefully you can find that extra time and spend it reading instead. So hopefully that was helpful, and hopefully that answered your question. So let's move on. Next up, someone asked paperbacks versus hardcovers. I am 100% a paperback person. I do love the idea of hardcovers. I do think that they're absolutely beautiful and they make for a much nicer collection, but I do physically enjoy reading via paperback more than hardback, and therefore I just like paperbacks more than hardcovers. But anyway, after that, someone asked, why do you not read on a Kindle? And for me, this is just a personal preference. I definitely do see the convenience and how much cheaper it could be to read on a Kindle, but happens to be, I just personally do not care for that. And I really enjoy reading physical books so much that I just never got myself into Kindles because I never really had a reason for it. Like, I personally do not mind spending my money on a physical book. Like, yeah, it's $10 to $20 and that could really add up over time. But at the end of the day, a lot of people, they'll go out of their house every single day and purchase like a $6+ coffee. I don't leave my house and I don't even drink coffee. So there's a lot of places that like people spend stupid money. Like, they'll go shopping like all of the freaking time. They're always purchasing new clothing. I never go shopping. I have a tiny freaking wardrobe. I'm always home. So I'm literally always in like sweatpants or leggings, t-shirts or sweatshirts. Like, I do not have a lot of clothing. I don't spend my money on clothing. I don't spend my money on coffee. I don't spend my money on going out to dinner and eating food out of my house. So there's a lot of ways where it's like I am saving money that I think people should not spend their money on. And therefore, when people complain of like, oh, well, why are you spending all of your money on physical books if you're not going to reread the majority of them? It's like, that's just where I like personally spending my money. And happens to be, I do know that Kindles are very convenient for people who, let's say, work out of their home or are like on the subway and they just want all of their books like in their back pocket all the time. Like, I totally see the convenience of that, but because I do work from home, I never really needed that as a thing because I'm always home, and when I'm reading, I'm always reading at home. So I could always just physically pick up the book that I need. So I never needed all of them in the back of my pocket. And therefore, I've never gotten used to the idea of reading on a tablet. Like, I'm not a very like technology person. Like, yeah, I do like technology for what it is, but I never really liked taking the idea of physical books and putting it onto, your laptop or whatever it is that you want to put it on. Like, I really like the idea of flipping a page and having the physical book in my hand and feeling the pages go from like one end to the other so I can see where I am in the book. Like, I just like the physical experience of reading, and therefore I've never had the urge to try changing it up and reading on a Kindle instead because I never really had a reason to do that. So hopefully that answered your question on why I don't read via ebooks / Kindles. But anyway, after that, someone asked, do you ever feel guilty about DNFing a book? And happens to be, yes, for a very long time, I did feel pretty guilty about DNFing books, mostly because I had already spent the money on the book. So if I didn't like it, I felt like it was a little bit wasteful. So I had to finish it. But happens to be over time, I've kind of gone in this idea in my head of like, well, the money's already spent, and since you already started reading it, you can't really return it. So what does it make a difference if you're not going to finish it or not? And that is kind of the reasoning behind of why I've tried to get a little bit better at DNFing, because at the time, like if you really think about it, it's like you cannot get your time back, even though you can't get your money back. So my money is already wasted. So if I'm not enjoying a book, why waste my time on it as well? And that is kind of the mindset of how I try to go about DNFing books. But yes, for a very long time, I have felt a little bit guilty about it, but it is something that I have been working on, and I do think that I've been getting better at it over time. So that is that. But anyway, next up, someone asked, what do you do with books you've bought but don't like / finish? So I do think that I have a lot of different things that I do. First of all, sometimes I just unhaul them. I'll either give them to like a used bookstore, or I'll try to sell them on like my Instagram. I'll just like post a story and sell them to whoever wanted them. But then also sometimes I'll give them to my siblings if I think that my siblings will enjoy them more than me. And then sometimes I keep them anyway. And that is very specific to like, what is the book? Like happens to be, I went to Book Bonanza at the beginning of the summer, and I had purchased a couple of books that I really did not end up enjoying, except I got them like signed from the authors, and therefore I kind of felt weird about getting rid of them, because I'm like, it's more of like a memory. So it's like, even though I didn't enjoy the book, I'm keeping it for the memory. So maybe eventually I will end up like getting rid of them, but at the moment, like it's like, even if I didn't like the book, I still keep them sometimes, where it's like, if somebody had gifted me a book, even if I didn't enjoy it, I'm gonna keep it for the memory. So I do very different things with books that I don't like, but in general, I either keep them anyway, or I give them to my siblings, or I eventually unhaul them. So that is what I do. But anyway, next up, someone asked, are you only a romance reader, or have you tried reading different genres? So over time, I have read different genres. When I was younger, I was very into mysteries. And then right when I got into reading, like a couple of years ago, I was very into fantasy, high fantasy, things along those lines. And only about a year or so ago did I get very heavily invested in reading romance. And now more or less, yes, I do only read romance because that is the genre that I like the most. But I do sometimes dabble in other things. Like I will read a random fantasy book here still, because I do like the genre. I just don't like it as much as I did like 2 years ago. And then also sometimes I will read a mystery here or there, but in general, yeah, I more or less just am a romance reader because that is what I enjoy reading the most. But anyway, after that, someone asked, have you ever had a book so good it put you into a reading slump? So yes, I definitely have had books like that in the past, specifically like Throne of Glass and ACOTAR. When I had read those books, nothing else was able to compare to it. So anything that I would read after that just like was not good enough, and therefore that eventually did put me into pretty bad reading slumps. And now I've learned over time that anytime I read Throne of Glass, I always have to read ACOTAR right after it, or vice versa. And then after I do that, I usually go through a couple of like rereads of just my favorite books, because for some reason it's like jumping from a book that is so freaking good into something like very random and nothing special can really make your reading slump worse. And therefore I try to ease myself back into regular books, if that makes sense. Like I'll read Throne of Glass, then I'll read ACOTAR, then I'll do a couple of rereads of my favorite books, and then hopefully slowly that will get me back into just like being able to read a nothing special book, if that makes sense. And then happens to be that kind of answers another question that someone asked, which was, how do you get through a reading slump? So when I'm in a reading slump, my first thing is trying to do like rereads of my favorite books, because at the end of the day, if it's your favorite book and you really enjoyed it, that will help you get back into the mood of wanting to read and pick up something new. And then happens to be, if I am in a reading slump, sometimes I will also try to like jump genres a little bit. Like if for some reason romances aren't working for me, I'll try to read a fantasy instead, or I'll try to read a mystery instead. Or if for some reason nothing's working for me, I'll just stop reading in general for a couple of days. Like I do think that that is actually one of the most helpful things for when I'm in a reading slump, just like take a step back and take a breather and stop forcing myself through books. Because if I do take a couple of days off, then when I do come back, I will be extra excited to start reading again. So I do think that that is very, very helpful for me as well when I'm in a reading slump. So anyway, that is more or less everything that I do when I am feeling a little bit down in my reading. But either way, with that said, I'm just going to answer a couple of more questions before I say goodbye to you guys, because I feel like I could sit here forever, but we do have to stop at some point. So next up, someone did ask, what was your favorite subject in school? So my favorite subject without a doubt was history. I'm still a really big fan of history, even though I'm not like necessarily a very big history reader. Like I don't necessarily know a lot about history, but I love the idea of history, and I've always been a fan of it. Like I love all types of history, like even recent history, like happens to be the decades of the 90s, like 1920s and 1970s with without a doubt are my favorite. And I love the Industrial Revolution. I love like, the French Revolution, the medieval times. I love the whole idea of like kings and queens and palaces and monarchies and things along those lines. Like I'm a really big fan of all of that sort of stuff. Also because I'm a really big fan of like architecture in general. But it happens to be like, fun fact, before I became a graphic designer, I was considering becoming an architect because I really did love the idea of that. But then I kind of gave up on it because it was way too much math, and I'm not a huge fan of math. So I basically ended up just switching up to graphic design. But basically, because I was always a really big fan of architecture, I really love the idea of history, like just going to places that were really old and seeing old houses and things along those lines. Like even before them, like I'm not even talking about just recent history. Like I love the ideas of like the Greeks and the Athens and things that happened like way back when. Like I'm just a fan of all histories in general. I love conspiracy theories. I love the idea of like history repeating itself and things along those lines. Like I am very into all that sort of stuff. So yeah, more or less that is my favorite subject in school and my favorite subject in general. But anyway, after that, someone did ask, do you make a plan for your feed or just do whatever? And I personally very much do plan out my feed. I feel like if you look at it, you can tell that it is very much based off a grid, and therefore that does have to be planned out in advance. So I do work on it beforehand, and I decide which picture is gonna go where and what I wanna put where so that it looks as aesthetically pleasing as possible. So yes, I definitely do plan out my feed as opposed to just posting whatever, whenever. But anyway, after that, let's just do 2 more questions. So someone asked if I have a private Instagram. So yes, I do have a private Instagram, but I don't really ever use it. I'm always only on my Instagram sort of thing, but I do have a private Instagram where I follow all of like my personal friends, like private friends and things like that, but I'm not really ever on that feed. Like, yeah, I do have like some private pictures on there, but I think the last time I posted was like literally like maybe 2019. I'm not very active on that one, but I do keep it just so that like I could keep up with my friends and things like that. But really my entire Instagram is just like my Bookstagram. So yeah, that is that. And then lastly, someone did ask, how is my foot healing? So first of all, thank you so much that you remembered that I did break my foot at the beginning of the summer, but thankfully it is doing much better. I am now walking. I can only still fit into sneakers. My foot is still a little bit swollen, but I hardly have a limp anymore, and it is getting better and better by the day. So hopefully I will be back to 100% soon, and that is that. So with that said, that is the end of my Q&A. I hope that you guys got to get to know me a little bit better, and if you have any further questions that you want me to answer for you, feel free to leave a comment down below, and I will try to get to as many as I can. But with that said, I hope that you enjoyed watching this video. So please give it a thumbs up if you did, and also subscribe to my channel if you are not currently subscribed, because I would really appreciate it. But either way, thank you so much for taking the time to watch my video. And with that said, until next time, enjoy reading.